Hey, it's Chad Brown. Welcome to another episode of the Disability Expert Podcast. Back with Aaron Dalton.
Glad to be back.
Yeah,
Let's get into it.
The three reasons people lose disability cases. I think the first reason people lose disability cases are generally related to work. If you look at reason one, I personally believe work is the worst thing you can do if you're trying to get on Social Security disability. Now, I'm going to talk in a minute when we get to the end of this about we don't live in an ivory tower and not understand the reality.
We've shot a whole episode about whether or not you should file.
About whether or not you should file and all. Yeah, by the way, check that out. We shot a whole episode on whether you should file or not, where we get into financial, medical, emotional struggle and decision-making that you should have. So before you comment, well, what am I supposed to do? I know that. I know you have to live and pay your bills. But the reality is work kills disability cases. So why is that? Like, what is, without just stating the glaringly obvious, which maybe that is what you need to state, why is work so detrimental to winning a disability case?
Let me just present the two arguments that we can make, and I'll let the listeners figure out which one they think sounds like a good argument and which one sounds like a lawyer.
Okay, sure.
Your Honor, my client is unable to work because their conditions are causing so much pain, and they would be off task and absent from work outside of employer tolerances. Argument two, Your Honor, my client is unable to work a full-time job because their current 20 hours a week job is the most that they can do, and they absolutely could not do any more than that.
Yeah, and by the way, let me give you the rest of the disclaimers. And sometimes they miss work, and they've had to limit their schedule. And no, Your Honor, they don't know about the SGA requirement. And so, even though they're only within $100 of SGA every month, I'm sure that had nothing to do. They're not artificially suppressing their income. Yeah, I mean, the reality is the disability program is for people who can't work. That's what it's for. And when you work, you take away the strongest argument we can make as your lawyer. You can't work. Because we can't make that argument anymore. I can't sit down and go, well, Your Honor, he can't work. Well, counsel, what about the $16,000 of reported income in each of the last 2 years when you said he couldn't work? You're like, well, let me explain, and you're right. You end up, it sounds like lawyering. Now, can you get, let's back up a second though. Right. Can you get on disability while you're working?
Yes.
Okay. How does that work?
This is a question of can versus should.
Yes.
There are technical rules.
And don't be confused.
Yes.
We don't think you should, but we know that you might. And if you might, you still could. So how does that work? What are generally, what are the rules? Like how does that work?
The big thing to be aware of is SGA, substantial gainful activity. That's the monthly amount of income that Social Security deems to be the equivalent of full-time work. It's a little over $1,600 a month in 2026. And so essentially, if you are below that number per month, Social Security is going to say, okay, well, that's not the equivalent of full-time work.
I'm not going to dive into self-employment. We'll get here in just a second. We did a whole episode on gig economy jobs where we go through the self-employment rules, because self-employment rules on SGA and how that work are a little bit different. But when you're talking about people working part-time, it's an average of it's the average of their monthly income.
Yes.
So just because you were over 1 month or two in a series of months doesn't mean necessarily you couldn't get on benefits. And certainly you have unsuccessful work attempts where people attempt to work but work less than 6 months. But it's just not that simple. I mean, you have to prove that you stopped work due to a change in your medical condition, and it just makes everything harder.
Yes.
I mean, it's just so much more difficult when people work. What about cash jobs and gig economy jobs? Let's don't talk about gig economy. Let's just treat that like self-employment. We did a whole episode on gig economy. If you want to watch that, let's talk about cash jobs though, because one of the things that happens a lot is our clients aren't working over the table.
Yes, it's not on the books.
It's not on the book. They're working under the table. So what about that, both ethically from the rules standard, but then practically, how does that walk through some of the problems with cash work?
Cash work is really difficult. The nice thing about reported income is there's a section of the file that I can go and I can look at, and I can see objectively and verify right there whether or not you're above or below SGA by quarter. So I can tell, is there going to be a closed period? Is there an argument that these jobs were below SGA? I can do none of that with cash jobs. All I can go on is either the reports that found their way into the medical records that makes it sound an awful lot like you're working full-time for cash,
Yeah.
or I have to rely on the client to provide documentation. But typically those cash jobs, there's not a good QuickBooks report that can be submitted. It's cash. There's no way of objectively proving how much or how little you were making, and that just absolutely tanks a case in front of a judge who may already be skeptical of your case for whatever reason, and to give them one more reason to deny the case.
Yeah, and I think there's two other things people need to understand about cash work. One, if you believe it won't make its way into the record, you're probably wrong.
Yep.
It never ceases to amaze me how it makes its way into the record. But what people don't think about is they don't know enough about disability hearings to understand that many judges will have an entire line of questioning about how you support your daily life.
Yes.
How do you pay your power bill? How do you pay your phone bill? How do you pay your cable? Like, well, I watch cable TV. How do you pay for it? You know, food, shelter, and you've got to explain all that. And I mean, the number of times it's happened is probably more than I can count, where we ask our clients every time they speak, like if you're one of our clients, every time we speak to you in our office, we ask you, are you working? Because I want to know. There's only too many times you get to a hearing and the client has told you for 17, 18, 25 straight months, I'm not working. All of a sudden they get in a hearing, they take an oath to tell the truth. By the way, we're not advocating not telling the truth. So we're not advocating that if you think that might be where this is going. And the judge starts asking them questions, and they're like, well, I do a little side work. Yeah, and you realize that they have been working for cash, where if they had been working for cash all along, we could have been forthright about it. We could have explained what they were doing. We could have given some income, not as good as maybe your DoorDash receipt where you actually can show you earned this 1099 income. But the reality is the math ain't mathing. The math doesn't work, and judges aren't dumb. Some of them aren't very charitable, but they're not dumb by and large. Right. And they put it together, and next thing you know, now we're back to what we'll talk about in a minute, which is a credibility issue, is all of a sudden you've lied, or heaven forbid, I've had this happen here. They asked them about it directly, and they forgot that they told the ER 2 visits that they had, they were at the ER 9 times for poison ivy. Yeah. That's your case, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, how did you get the poison ivy on your legs 9 times? Well, it could have been running the weed eater and the landscaping job where you were getting paid cash, right? And so you've denied work. Now you're confronted with a specific piece of evidence that reasonably looks like you're working, unless you're just really bad about where you weed eat at your own house, which isn't usually the case, right? And so it makes its way into the record. One thing I do want to clarify, though, is what I'm really talking about is work after you say you became disabled. There is an argument that oftentimes people work after they develop their disability. So they will, for example, they might have a diagnosis of MS. They might work 5 or 6 years after that diagnosis. And that can actually be really favorable to your case. Right. But what we're talking about is you've said you became disabled on January 1, 2024, 2025, whatever it is. And now we're dealing with all this work after the fact, after you've applied for disability. It just kills cases.
Another thing I think that hurts the credibility there is, to get a job, you have to look for work. And a lot of people, you don't get hired the first job interview. So the judges start thinking, not only have you been working, but you went out and you interviewed for Lord knows how many jobs before you found one that would hire you.
We could jump into unemployment, which doesn't help cases either, but that's probably its own episode. We won't get into unemployment, looking for work in that capacity. But so work kills cases. I think the next big thing that really kills cases is insufficient medical evidence. we talked about in our episode where we talked about the foundations of a strong disability case, we talked about the need for positive medical evidence. In some respects, what you have is sort of this, I don't know what it is, yin yang, two sides of the same coin. What makes one case positive, the absence of it makes it negative. So for anybody that might not have seen that episode, why is medical evidence important just from a foundational standpoint?
It frames how the judge is going to be looking at a case. I think about the judge looking at a file before a hearing, and the judge is largely going off of the medical records. And so if there is a 12-month or an 18-month gap in those records, it's going to raise some huge questions. But if there's been that consistent treatment, it really does change how the judge is looking at the case, the questions they're going to be asking.
Yeah, and so I think, at a very sort of basic level, you have to have medical evidence, so the judge can't approve your case at all.
Right.
But beyond that, you get issues where you have gaps in treatment, you have inconsistent sort of treatment, which means not that you necessarily have gaps, but the doctor says you should be here every month, and you go every 3. Not only do you have that, you have issues where people aren't treating with the right provider. So how does that negatively impact your case?
So one of the things that the judges are looking for is, are you with the correct type of doctors, or, is not to insult primary care doctors, but if the primary care doctor is treating all of your impairments, the judge starts to wonder, are they really that bad if you've not been to the rheumatologist and the spinal surgeon and the pain management clinic or the psychiatrist? So that it really helps with the credibility, improving the severity of the impairments, to go off and see these other specialists and really exhaust all avenues to try and improve.
And we used to see this more now with sort of the merging of all these practice areas under hospitals. You see a lot less of a family doctor trying to manage everything. But man, I won't name them, but I used to just cringe when I saw some doctors' names in the file, because I knew that doctor thought they could treat everything. And maybe they could, or maybe they couldn't, but from a disability standpoint, it doesn't help your case. Like if you have a severe psychological problem, you need to be seeing a counselor and a psychiatrist, because what we're trying to do, like as we talk about in a lot of these episodes, is build this golden chain of evidentiary progression from diagnosis to symptom to functional limitation. And that diagnosis and symptom sort of description by the specialist just carries more weight.
Yes.
And that's what we're looking for. We're trying to not only just build the medical record, we're trying to build the strongest medical record possible, so that at the end of the day, the judge can't question your credibility. And not treating with the right providers creates massive amounts of problems with that. Sometimes people don't have insurance, and that's a different question. But if you have it, and then you run into the issue, if you have insurance and you don't use it, then you're in hearings and the judge is like, well, I mean, if your knee problem's so bad, why didn't you go to the orthopedic?
Right.
And you run right into that problem you're talking about, which is the judge sort of sets back and says, well, maybe the problems aren't as severe as they're saying they are. What about noncompliance? So say you do have medical treatment. I think one of the big problems around insufficient evidence and evidentiary type medical record issues is noncompliance. So what is so damaging about noncompliance?
Oh, it's a direct hit to the credibility. The judge is looking at that and saying, well, the doctor's telling you to do something. You're telling me that this problem is terrible for you, and it causes all of these different limitations in your ADLs and your symptoms. So why didn't you just do what the doctor told you to do to try and help it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you get into a range of noncompliance. They won't, and sometimes there's good reasons for noncompliance.
Oh yeah, there can absolutely be good reasons for noncompliance, but we can only argue those reasons when they're documented, and you're telling the provider, hey, this didn't work. Hey, this side effect was actually worse than the thing we were trying to treat to begin with.
Sure. And especially when you see like people on biologics, for example, there's massive amounts of side effects. But if you look, what we're talking about are deficits in the medical record. So not having records is a deficit. Not having the right records is a deficit. But sometimes it's what the records don't say that they could say that's the deficit, explaining noncompliance, explaining why you stopped taking a medication, why you changed doctors, why you did the things you did. So it's not enough to just build the medical record when things don't look like a judge would presumably want them to look in terms of consistency and compliance, you've got to explain why.
Right.
Yeah. So in medical evidentiary issues too, you also have the problem of ER records. And I mean, we could talk about other types of medical evidence. We could talk about workers' comp records and how bad they are because the workers' comp doctors try to minimize because they're all on the payroll of the insurance company. And yeah, that's a different issue. But ER records are something we deal with a lot. And people need to understand that damaging notes inside records hurt your case.
Yes.
So I use ER records as an example because it's frequent that people will they'll visit the ER for some presumable emergency or some level of emergency, but usually it's not a car accident. It's I was on the roof cleaning out the leaves and I fell, and it's like, hold on a minute, I thought you couldn't climb stairs. And here you got this guy on the roof and he's got a rope tied around him to the chimney and the rope broke, and and it's so damaging. And so I think what kills cases are when you don't have the records or the right records, or when you do have the records, but they show things that aren't very helpful. It's just amazing to me how many things most of our clients don't know.
Right.
They've never stopped to think about, what is this going to look like from a hearing? They want to know, like we do these, you do pre-hearings and they're like, well, what should I expect? Or, what should I wear? Or who's going to be in the room? And all those are valid questions. I've had lots of pre-hearings when no one really asks us, well, they might ask, well, what judge questions are the judge going to ask? But it's rare that they say, well, what's in the record that I need to know about that I have to explain?
Right.
What are some traps that I could walk into based on what my fact pattern is? And at the end of the day, deficiencies, problems in the medical records kill probably as many cases as work. So even if you're not working, we've got to build this entire story around why you can't return to any work or some lower level of work if you're 50, 54, or you're over 55. And I think those issues are ones that are a lot of times within your control. When we talk about sort of the base of disability cases, there's a lot of primary factors that are sort of outside your control: age, education, work experience, who the judge is, for example. But these are ones directly in your control often if you have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you got to be trying. You got to be trying. So the third thing, though, that I think kills cases is credibility issues, which once again, this is the other side of that coin of being credible builds your case. Having credibility issues kills your case, just like work and deficiencies in medical treatment. How does that sort of play out in cases where you see, like, you get out of that hearing and you're like, man, I'm pretty sure we're going to lose?
When I'm doing pre-hearings with clients, sometimes I'll have a client who will ask, should I tell the judge that, or is it okay if I maybe bend the truth a little bit? And what I advise clients is, if the judge catches you in one lie, everything else you testify to at the hearing is going to be a lie in the judge's eyes. Yeah. And that is just a really it's a hard truth, but it's very difficult to overcome. If the judge catches one thing that the judge thinks you're lying about, they're probably not going to believe pain severity, limitations. And so it's really important not to minimize the symptoms, but also not to overstate the symptoms.
Yeah, it's the, Pinocchio wouldn't have won his disability case, right? The reality is that credibility in the disability context is about consistency. It's not about character, even though I would warn clients and people who are applying for disability, if you have things that socially might be perceived as having sort of a bad character or an amoral nature to them, you have a history of drug abuse or any other number of things, but judges a lot of times, even though it doesn't show up on the hearing or in the decision, they're going to consider it. but I think it's more damaging to your case to have a bad ER record that makes it look like you're lying about work than it does to maybe have a positive marijuana screen in your file.
Right. Or Lord forbid to lie about the marijuana screen that was positive. Because you never see a decision that just says, I'm denying Miss So-and-so because I think she's a bad person. But sometimes you can read between the lines and you're like, oh, the judge did not care for that.
It's funny when we review federal court cases from other attorneys. A lot of times, we didn't do the hearing, so we're reviewing the decision, and you look at it and you're like, I think they denied them because they used drugs.
Yep.
Like, it's not in the decision anywhere, and you'll call the referring attorney up and say, "Is your client have a?" And they're like, "Yeah, they have a bad drug problem."
Oh, there it was.
Yeah, there. And you're like, look, that's probably why they lie. It doesn't mean we will or won't appeal. Those are based on legal issues, but I think credibility issues. Being consistent with what you say you can do, being correct in your description of that to the judges, your life reflecting that, like your ADLs. What you do on a daily basis. A little warning about social media. Judges aren't supposed to go to social media. I'd be hard-pressed to think some of them don't. We look at social media for screening sometimes when we're questioning, those issues. So work, medical issues, credibility, all case killers. Carrie's killing me over there. She's like, we got.
Oh no, have we went over it again? Oh, we did.
All right. So why do cases lose? They lose. If you've got work-related issues or medical treatment issues or credibility issues, you got to clean them up. You got to find a way to get rid of these red flags. But those three buckets. But if you can avoid those three buckets issues, most other stuff's manageable. So there you go. Check it out. Like I said, we got a new guide and assessment, and it goes through, I think, like 26 negative factors in disability cases. So check those out, see where you stand. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching. Oh, and subscribe. Take care.